Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the October 16th edition of the Meyers Report Roundtable. Today, we are discussing the aftermath and what happened with Hurricane Helene, and to a lesser degree, Hurricane Milton, because the great severity, the real damage that was done to North Carolina came from Helene, which was unbelievable. The other aspect is that Florida is used to more hurricanes, plus they apparently have a better governor. In North Carolina on September 30th, they lost power to about 300,000 or 400,000 people. And on 5 days ago, Florida had lost power to 3.9 million. Well, now, more than 2 weeks in, North Carolina is now down to having 9,000 of their customers out of power, which is certainly an improvement. But Florida has restored power to virtually to 3.85 million people. The differences were stark. Florida was prepared. North Carolina was not. Tonight, we have with us Jim Womack, who's going to give us our update from North Carolina. Jim is I don't want to embarrass you, Jim, but he's an extraordinary guy. He's a West Point graduate. He has a Bachelor of Science in Engineering, a master's degree in science. He's also got a heavy background in engineering, as everybody does from West Point. And he's a 20-year military veteran. His list of accolades and his list of accomplishments is extraordinary. He serves as a county commissioner. He's involved with North Carolina's Mining and Energy Commission, and it just goes on. We have with us Don Day. He's our chief meteorologist and climatologist. He has more than 30 years experience with day weather, and he's a specialist in high atmospheric balloon flights, as well as deep ocean exploration. And he provides weather forecasting to various private companies and over 70 radio stations. We also have with us Hal Daub, who is a former 4 or 5-time congressman from Nebraska and 2-time mayor of Omaha. Hal is, he's also an attorney. Besides being brilliant and a decent man, he's had to work through several disasters in his own town in Omaha. And we also have coming in Brett Bellavacqua. Brett is a former editor and producer and director for CNBC, MSNBC, NBC, NBC Sports, Bloomberg, and a bunch of others. And he basically left them because, as he puts it, the major nets that he was working for wanted him to lie. Then we have Amanda Schumacher, who's going to tell us what she saw. Amanda is a horse trainer, an equine behavioral specialist, and she works on the ground with the Mountain Mule Packer Ranch, which has been supporting. She's been on for the first 11 out of the first 14 days. She's been on the ground hauling stuff up by mule. Jim Womack, we hear that the dead will be in the thousands, not hundreds. Is there an official estimate of the dead yet?
I think certainly the numbers are suspect. If you look at some private websites which are trying to account for people that family, friends, and loved ones are trying to reach, that the number is approaching 2,000. But the official estimate right now is still around 100 for North Carolina. And those are, in my opinion, those are really what's been confirmed dead. With witnesses and verification, dental records, that sort of thing. I just don't think you can trust that number. I was just on the phone an hour ago with one of my friends who was doing some restoration work up in the Burnsville area, and he tells me that there were places clearly where there were FEMA was working with contract dog teams to try to identify cadavers that are buried. And in many cases, the FEMA teams have left, and the cadaver dogs are gone, and there's still, the aromas are still there. You can still tell that there are dead and decaying bodies in certain places, but they're so covered by mud and debris that it's impossible to know whether it's a human remains or whether it's an animal. So at this juncture, I say the number suspect. We know that there's hundreds of people still accounted for, even though some may very well be alive and displaced. It's very difficult to say. These are not organized communities in the same way you would have in urban areas. These are communities that are with long spans of countryside between hamlets and towns, and it's very difficult to have accurate assessments of who's alive and who's displaced, and then of course the homeless camp in Asheville numbered 1,000, as many as 1,000 at a time, and those people have very little accountability. No one really keeps track of where they are and what they're doing, and very few of those people are still around. So it's hard to know how many of those were swept away in the flood. So at this
From
point,
what we hear,
yeah, it's
we're
just
hearing
hard to say.
We're hearing stories individually where there's one story that showed 11 members of one family, which goes certainly against a death estimate of 100. We're hearing stories of a church that was gone with 100 people in it. To show just how bad this is, Brett, can you show the video of what you and what Amanda went through, what she saw in North Carolina? Go.
Hi, this is Amanda Schumacher, and this story starts on September 29th, when I was a part of the convoy that delivered 600 bales of hay from Troy, North Carolina to WNC Regional Livestock Center in Canton. On Sunday the 30th, I joined the Mountain Mule Packer Ranch team in Montreat. For the next week, we delivered medicine, food, supplies, and hope by mule throughout western North Carolina.
Thank you guys for clearing the path.
Well, when y'all come back, we should have it all done.
We worked Montreat, Black Mountain, Swannanoa, Newland, Roan Mountain, Burnsville, Murchison, Bat Cave, and so many areas in between. On our 8th day, coming out of the mountain, we finally ran into FEMA at the Mountain Heritage High School, and on the 9th day, we hooked up with the 82nd Airborne. Throughout the entire effort, one thing was consistent. Devastated locals were thankful. Thankful for volunteers from all over the country, for their neighbors, for the peace and hope the mules delivered, and in some cases, thankful to be alive.
Amanda, did you smell the death that Jim Womack was talking about?
I did. Unfortunately, my truck doesn't have AC, so I drive around everywhere with the windows down. And there was one place, my truck was the one that did not have, any of the supplies, like the truck or trailers hooked up. So I ran the convoy everywhere we went. So I would go ahead and try and find places that we could park and stage the mules to get through. And you couldn't not smell it, between the fresh dirt that was just completely moved around, and then the buzzards that you would see flying over in certain areas, and you would just catch whiffs of it, and you would look at each other and just put your head down because you knew you just didn't have to.
You ran into someone who witnessed who was where there was a church that was wiped out.
Yeah, so when we were in Montreat, that's what they were telling us. One of the locals came down and he also gave us location to another mudslide where the people went. It was on a hill. The church was on a hill, so they thought it would be better from the rushing river. So that's where the locals went, into that church, and a mudslide just took the whole church out. And they got to the point where they just stopped counting bodies and just started tagging them.
Did FEMA ever stop counting bodies?
I can't say who it was or wasn't doing the tagging, but I don't know if they could find them to tag them at that point.
Amanda, what was the name of the little town where that happened?
That was in Swananoa.
Swananoa, thank you.
Yeah. That area,
Um,
that area.
Right, yeah, thank you.
And I'm not from there, so, you know, and we didn't have GPS or, you know, your cell service or anything. I got to where I would just take screenshots for me, and then the guys downloaded the offline maps. So we could at least, you know, utilize that as far as like search and rescue and supplies.
Did you have any National Guard or state patrol or FEMA people with you?
What do you mean as far as with us?
That
Were
accompanied
they
your
helping
pack
you?
mule train or your effort to deliver help to those people? Were there any other government people from other units of government along with you that could see what you were trying to do?
So as far as with us, no, we worked with the Cajun Navy rescue group in the beginning. Now, the thing with our group that I believe set it apart was our leader, you know, the old boss man. He literally trains the special forces how to pack mules or how to pack donkeys or anything wherever they get into other parts of the world. So that is what he does. So his thing was, listen, you're telling me I am certified and qualified to teach our Marines how to do this, but I'm not certified to do it for my own people.
So
Now,
when you
nobody ever
finished your work, how did you get back? What backtrack did you do? You went in, then what did you do? Where
As
did you
far-
go on your
So-
trip in? How did you come back out of that with all your supplies delivered and your work done?
Well, it's still not done. No, so now that we have met the locals and we have gotten an actual boots on the ground supply need. So instead of just dumping clothes and dumping food and dumping water, that they no longer have the room to supply. What we've done is we've gotten with the U-Haul, they've got 2 storage units, but 2 U-Haul box trucks. Tractor Supply has actually donated fencing supplies and things like that to
Okay.
rebuild. So that's been our first trip back as our return trip to, that was at Roan Mountain. Now this weekend, I'm working on taking the supply list that is needed from the Burnsville Baptist Church women that we met. And now we want specific needs list, you know, things like generators.
Amanda, rather than go into the specific needs now,
That's great. Thank you. That's fantastic. That's just fantastic.
Thanks.
Wow.
you did wonderfully. But question, for the first 7 days, was there any FEMA help? Yes or no?
I'm not where I was. I can tell you
Okay.
that. No,
Jim-
we had good old boys crawling out of the woods with
Did you
chainsaws.
was any FEMA people telling you not to bring supplies in?
Now, I don't know about FEMA people, but when I got to Old Fort to get on 40, the state trooper did turn me around and tell me I had to go around a different way to get to where I needed to go. And I stopped at a fire department because I had no service, and I was like, hey, I need to go here. I'm trying to go here.
Okay.
I'm with the mule team. We need to get here. And he goes, come on now. He goes, what jurisdiction are we in today? He goes, hold on, let me make a phone call.
So
And
the
he
point
called.
is, you weren't getting a lot of help.
No, I wasn't gonna get through until the local fire department called the chief of police and said, hey, let her through. Anywhere we
Got it.
went, the state troopers would stop us. I mean, 100%. And then when we would go talk to a local, they would say, no, come on, we'll escort you down where you need to go. We'll get you through those points.
Jim Womack, the report that we were getting was that by Sunday, I guess 7, 8 days in, there were 300 active helicopters working search and rescue, of which only 3 were not private. You know, when in 2016, when Hurricane, I forgot what it was, hit Haiti, the 82nd Airborne was on the ground in 48 hours. They were an hour away from here, from Western North Carolina, and the 101st Airborne was 2 or 3 hours away. And between those two units, they have what, 300, 400, 500 helicopters? What happened to the 82nd? And as I understand it, you played a role in freeing up that logjam. Do you want to tell us what happened?
Yeah, first off, I was not instrumental in clearing any log jams. I was just in the coordination loop or just in the communications loop. I'm not going to take any credit for anything because I was remote and I was not there on the ground to be able to influence
Okay,
that.
tell us what happened with the phone call that ultimately went to the governor of North Carolina, where he had his butt chewed.
Yeah. So all I know about that is that I was receiving reports from folks that had remote access in those areas, that there was no evidence of coordination between civil and military authorities. And what I did at the time just simply was relaying back to one of our U.S. senators and to my brother, who's a congressman, to share with the National Guard Bureau some observations on the ground, and just simply to pass along what was being reported to me. So I was only just a relay. And what we were told was that the National Guard Bureau was completely unaware. Lieutenant General Butts at the National Guard Bureau was unaware that there were problems.
He's in charge of the National Guard throughout the country?
Right. Does he sit on the Joint Chiefs of Staff? I don't know if he does or not. I just know he's the head honcho of the National Guard Bureau. And we had a conversation at the request of my brother. We had a conversation about what was being observed on the ground, that there was a lack of military to military coordination between the National Guard Bureau or the National Guard authorities on the ground and the 82nd and 101st.
By the way, the reports that I was getting from some of our own people who also were in communication with the 82nd was that the people in the 82nd and veterans everywhere were seething. They were furious that there was no help coming.
Those were the reports that we were getting as well. And I was told by two officers who I can't mention, that were essentially whistleblowers, that said they were active component officers that were in the coordination loop, and they were getting very little response back from the state of North Carolina emergency department, which is manned largely by military, the military department here. And that it appeared, and I'm not saying it was true, but it appeared that there was a slow walking of support from the state of North Carolina to the western counties. And you can only suppose why that might be. But they said that it was apparent that there was either a large amount of bureaucracy or just lack of concern about the dire straits in the western counties, because after 72 hours or 96 hours, there still was not a noticeable response with boots on the ground and helicopters in the air. So the 101st and the 82nd were frustrated with the lack of basing rights at National Guard facilities and the lack of on-ground command and control. And they were expressing their concerns because they were ready to go. They were ready to go in and help. And there was just a lack of coordination between and among the military elements.
There's some people, are you familiar with a term that is used in hospital called slow coding?
That's right. Right.
And that's more than negligence. In this particular case, as I understand it, you got a call from the lieutenant general commanding the 101st Airborne in Fort Campbell?
No, I didn't. No, the only lieutenant general I spoke to was the head of National Guard Bureau.
Okay.
He promised to look into it. I forwarded to him a report that came from Senator Budd as he was on the ground observing and reporting as well from firsthand reports that he was concerned that the lack of federal and state coordination and emergency action was really contributing to the agony in the western counties, that they just did not respond quickly and efficiently to the needs, and in fact interfering with some of the civilian relief that was being provided. So that's probably the most frustrating thing, not the fact that they were slow in responding, but the fact that they were interfering with some of the civilian volunteer support that was going on. And I think a lot of that's been worked out over the last week, but in the first 4 to 5 days, there was a clear evidence of a lack of preparedness, a lack of coordination, and slow walk in the support.
was it 4 to 5 days or 7 to 8?
Well, it was at least the first 4 or 5. After that, there's the fog of war. After that, there was little by little, there was progress being made to the point that you actually had airspace being controlled and volunteer support being vectored correctly. But we should have been on the ground 24 hours after the storm passed. And there should have been immediate relief with helicopters flying, the military department involved, and it just didn't happen for days.
Well, the obvious question is, how could we be in Haiti in 48 hours
Yeah.
and 7 or 8 days, which is what I've been hearing, to Western North Carolina, which is an hour away? I mean,
Well, it's less than an hour's flight time from Fort Liberty, also known as Fort Bragg, and not much different from Fort Campbell.
By the way, Hal Daub was born at Fort Bragg.
Yeah.
I was born at
Were you born at my namesake hospital at Womack Medical Center?
Post Hospital number 1, Fort
Okay.
Bragg, Cumberland County, Fayetteville, North Carolina. Jim, I'm interested in a larger picture now that some days have passed since all of this to this evening that we're all together. How large a manning level does North Carolina have in the National Guard? Do they have sufficient strength, manning, equipment? Are they deficient? Has the governor paid attention to that? Because a lot of this reaction to emergencies has to do with, are there people you can send to help?
Yeah, I don't look at their 2715 reports, so that's not something I would normally see, and most of those are confidential anyway. I would tell you they're probably suffering the same consequences that the active duty military is suffering right now, where they're not meeting quotas. But that's not an excuse for not being able to be responsive. You have trained and experienced National Guard members around the state who are merely waiting to follow orders, and if the orders are to just to hold fast until we sort things out, then they're going to do exactly what they're told. So I don't think it's a manning level problem as much as it's a motivation and an understanding of what needs to be done and when.
Okay, and then paint a picture for all of us on the call tonight. Geographically, was this what's the dotted line on the North Carolina map where the help was needed compared to where they didn't need any help? Where was the allocation of resources?
Okay, so there were 25 counties that were affected in some manner in the western part of the state. In the extreme southwestern part of the state, those counties were pretty much intact down around Cherokee, around the Georgia line. But as you get a little further inland and up in the mountains, all the way from Henderson County, all the way up into the Blue Ridge, up along the area in Watauga and Avery and Mitchell counties, it was spotty, and then it was tragically damaging as you got into the deeper mountain valleys, because the water runoff was a result of quick and rapid water flow down these mountain valleys, where it had no other place to go, where there's no relief, and the water just took away everything down into the river basins. And so this is, again, 1,000-year flood. Some counties that had less severe relief were not as affected, but the ones with the major relief, the ones with the tallest mountain chains and the steepest slopes, were the ones that really suffered.
Thank you.
Don Day is with us. Don is our chief meteorologist and climatologist. Don, why was this hurricane as bad as it was? Did they, as I understand it, they had rain for days before the hurricane hit?
Okay, so you are correct that there was rain in advance of the hurricane that was several inches. In fact, there were some areas that got 6 inches or more of rain before the hurricane even hit. Then as the hurricane came up and rolled into the Carolinas there was the additional 12 to 20 inches of rain that fell. This was a situation to where I don't think there was anything anybody could do to plan for the volume of rain. There were 20 to 30 inches of rain that fell over this 2 to 3 day period. And to the point made earlier about the steep canyons and valleys of the mountainous terrain, you cannot have that much water over that short period of time without it going to, the lowest points of gravity, which is where the towns and cities and houses are in those valleys. It really was a flood of biblical proportions that you're not going to get very often. And, you could throw around terms like 1,000-year floods or so, and that certainly would be the case.
It's one of the things that I think may have been the difference between North Carolina and Florida is Florida was used to this and they made preparations. But in North Carolina, apparently people were not expecting this, so they didn't evacuate. They weren't prepared, and they were caught defenseless. Jim?
Yeah, Gary. So let me give you an example. So 4 years ago, almost exactly, right at the start of COVID, or in the midstream of COVID, we had a similar type of situation, a weather event out west, and just coincidentally during the presidential election cycle of 2020, and it occurred right in the window of August, September, and a little earlier in the cycle. And I recalled distinctly that Lieutenant Governor Dan Forest went out and was volunteering with Samaritan's Purse, no less, in the western counties doing flood relief. So we did have some experience in 2020 with a similar type of weather event, but not nearly as severe, with maybe 1/4 of the amount of rain that had to be handled. And he spent a good part of 6 weeks working in flood relief out in the western counties in right in the midst of all the COVID epidemic. And I noticed that there wasn't a lot of media coverage of the relief effort out there at that time. It was almost like they were out of sight, out of mind in the western counties. And were it not for Samaritan's Purse and some of the volunteer organizations, probably wouldn't have known anything about it. But no, this is not completely unusual for weather events, especially when you get a lot of rainfall to have flooding effects in the western counties. And so this is not totally unexpected that if you had a torrential downpour as a result of a tropical depression, that it could be really catastrophic. I think we've seen that.
North Carolina is not used to being in a normal hurricane path, at least certainly not in the mountains. The horrible nature of this is very obvious. It's very clear. And obviously the death toll is going to be in the thousands, no matter what anybody says, it will wind up there. However, the good side of all of this, when you're in disaster and you're in trials and tribulations, the best and the worst show up. And the spirit of the people of North Carolina and the help that they've been getting from other parts of the country without government aid, I just found staggering. Have you seen this as well?
I think it's always the case. The human spirit always seeks to prevail. And this is a hardy bunch in the western counties. These are prototypical Americans. They got the same DNA as our founding fathers, and they love freedom and liberty. And some of the first questions we were hearing out of the western counties at the time were, we've lost everything. Now, where do we go vote? Some of these people were really interested in making sure that they got to express their First Amendment rights through to the right to vote this fall. They were very concerned about losing election sites and that sort of thing. But there, and then in the spirit of cooperation and in this human tragedy, there were people coming from all over the country to come help. And God bless them all for doing that, especially in a time when the government is still trying to figure out what to do.
Jim, can I ask you, has your legislature met in special session to deal with
and they passed House Bill 149 unanimously. Which is unusual for our legislature. And it was signed into law by the governor, which appropriated millions of dollars for relief in the western counties. And there was a whole section of that bill pertaining to the elections, making special accommodations for those people to vote.
Thank you.
Jim, you're also before you wound up in this mess, your expertise also involves in keeping elections clean. You're part of the Election Integrity Network. Do you think that they'll be able to vote properly in Western North Carolina?
A short answer is no. It won't be in the traditional method. There are a number of sites which are being restored with power and running water and adequate to run an election. But there are some counties out there that are very slow to respond. And you know, not to sound too political, but all of our county boards of election were given the authority by the General Assembly and House Bill 149 last week. They were given the authority to decentralize and make decisions at their level that normally would require centralized authority at the state, which is good. But some of those county boards of election, all of whom are controlled by the Democrat Party of North Carolina, some of those boards have elected not to extend the number of voting sites to accommodate the people that are disadvantaged. And I think that's atrocious. They've had the opportunity to go back. They misinterpreted the law initially and said, we're not going to expand the number of sites that we're using. So now, like Henderson County, for example, has only got one voting site.
For the whole county?
For the whole county, one voting site. And they're 4 times the size of my county. And my county, which was not affected by the flood, has got 2 voting sites for the early voting. So, you know, that's the sort of thing that is really appalling about all of this, that people are not making accommodations. There are MAT teams, multi-partisan assistance teams, which are authorized by the bill to go out and provide assistance, not just to the disabled, but to anybody that wants to vote in these resource centers. And yet we're not hearing a lot of stories yet about them sending out or coordinating for the use of MAT teams to go into these pockets of displaced people so that they can help them, enable them to vote. So we're going to be monitoring that very carefully. One of the 8 lanes of election integrity that we closely monitor is what we call vulnerable voters. And the Western counties all fall into that category now. They're all vulnerable because of the unusual nature of what happened. And we are going to continuously monitor their situation and try to make accommodations wherever, to the extent that we're allowed.
Jim, it's not to be burdensome, and I'm not preaching. I just want to urge you with your network to understand that monitoring under these circumstances appears to me not enough. What you need to mobilize is people that will help those people that are handicapped, that lost their car, that can't drive, that can get, however your system lets them vote wherever a lot of people need help if they're not absentee ballots. I don't know what your rules are there, to get them to the poll. So maybe it's like a lot of other disasters where people just need help to get their job done. Maybe that's the key, to mobilize a marching army of people that will get people who otherwise couldn't, to get them to the polls.
That's the plan. Unfortunately, we're kind of up against one other hard and fast rule. We passed an anti-Zuckerbucks feature in Senate Bill 747 last year, and you're not allowed to provide private contributions, monetary or non-monetary, to an election board. Okay, so in other words, we can't offer our services to an official election board without being in violation of state law. And that's but you can pick up your neighbor and take him to the poll, right? You certainly can. You certainly can. And those things are the kinds of work that we're looking to do now, is to try to expand the coordination network so that we can help and educate those boards of election about the need, and then to help people get to the polls, the polling places where they can cast.
So Gary, I have a couple other questions. Have you got broadband and or fairly reliable restored internet, everybody that's got a cell phone?
Well, it's spotty in many cases. Starlink, Elon Musk, God bless him, he was able to get some Starlinks into a number of places out there, which really enabled us to reestablish some communications. I was on a call yesterday morning, and surprisingly, I had 6 of the counties on my call that were drastically affected. That they're able to get out because they've either got Starlink access or because they were able to get a cell phone coverage. So we do have some communications into the disaster area with people that are election monitors. So my point was
Facebook type Starlink. You could get a lot of information out to where people can call a number to get a ride to the polls.
Yeah, we're working on
an absentee ballot. That might be something to think about.
Yeah, we're working on a system that would help enable the ability to get to the places. The first part, though, is just finding out the decisions being made at the county level
Oh, yeah.
about where to vote, where they're going to be able to vote, what extended hours they're going to offer. Because each
Sure.
of those counties now can set their own separate schedules. They're not following a state schedule. So we got to
what'll happen
we're educated.
is like in Georgia, you're going to come up as you work through your disaster relief scenarios, you'll come up against deadlines where if the vote isn't cast, it can't be counted. It's a problem. You get in that last 3, 4, 5 days.
Yeah.
So that's the volunteer piece, because obviously your governor's not going to facilitate any of those resources.
I think you're correct on that.
What about ham radio nets? Have you been using those?
I'm sure that they're being used by those ham radio operators. I don't know the extent of that. I really don't.
Amanda, if you're still with us, can you basically kind of summarize very quickly what's the spirit of the people that you've seen out there?
Yeah, they're just hopeful. I mean, we agree with everything James has said. I mean, that's exactly what you see and what it is, just controlled chaos. But when you're in it, the outside world is so divided, but when you're in it, they're so united, and everybody's still willing to help everybody, you know, any way they can.
But my point is, they're not beaten, are they?
Nah, they're not beating it. He said it right. They're hardy people up there.
Yeah.
When you were moving around there and you saw FEMA people, did you see any of them working?
I mean, working as far as the work we were just doing, or standing around trying to figure out an idea of what to do. No, we didn't
Were
see
they
any of
working
them.
were any of them working up a sweat? I take it that's a no.
Can I add something?
Go ahead.
Wait,
Go ahead,
Brent, Brent, speak up, Brent.
Yeah, if y'all want my honest answer, the way they were dressed, the way they cared for themselves, and the way they represented themselves was sloppy and slothy.
The one thing I noticed is, and it's in the video, and there's some situations that the man in charge of the mule packer team doesn't want to have certain stuff out. But as you see, when her truck pulls up to FEMA, it's still daylight out. They're all out during the day all the time. And every truck they have lined up in that video is spotless clean. And there's nothing in the back of any of the trucks. They're all empty. And that was something that I took away. There's a lot of times when I saw stuff from the government, they were all standing in one spot and very clean.
My
When
truck's
I used to manage buildings, high-rise buildings in Midtown Manhattan, New York, the way you could identify a good superintendent versus a bad one. The bad one had the clean uniforms. The good one was always dirty because he was working.
right there with you.
And Jim, your joke, I understand. And everything that I have seen and heard is that the people are upbeat and they're positive. But your joke, in addition to what we've also seen and heard, is that the anger toward the lack of government aid and the lack of activity by FEMA is enough to get people very angry. And correct me if I'm wrong, the first guardsmen in the state of North Carolina, about 1,000 of them, they were sent by Governor DeSantis from Florida?
You know, there are differing reports about that. I think there were certainly some guard advance parties on the ground in the first 96 hours before the arrival of the Florida Guard. But I think the first large scale deployments actually did come from out of state. I think you're right. You know, I'm not sure about the timing and the orders and all that, but I do, there's clearly a more responsive and a more prepared element for disaster relief out of Florida, and even the Cajun Navy out of Louisiana, than there is out of the North Carolina.
Is there any reason for the slow coding reaction by the governor?
You know, you can only speculate about that. I don't want to question his motives, because it could be just a sheer lack of experience and knowledge and on how to proceed, or it could have been willful and intentional. Who knows?
Okay,
Not
you're
sure that it
familiar,
matters to the people that are needing the
you're
support.
familiar with Hanlon's razor?
Yeah.
Never attribute to conspiracy that which can be satisfied by grotesque stupidity.
Yeah. So, but you know, it's irrelevant to the people on the ground that really needed the support. You know, they deserve better than they got from the state of North Carolina. And now it's, you know, our resolve has to be to do better. We have to, you know, whether, you know, Ronald Reagan used to joke all the time. He said, the worst words you can hear from anyone is, I'm here from the government and I'm here to help, you know, and that's the way the people out West are. They don't trust their government. We the people out there, they're hardy folks. They're, you know, I know a bunch of them that I've worked with over the years in partisan activities, and these guys are rugged individuals. They don't depend on the government for much, and they're not expecting a lot from the government. So when they don't get it, it's just more of the same. I would tell you though that doesn't mean that we're going to be any less motivated to go out there and provide them the assistance they need for the services they need, and that includes the election, the ability to cast a vote in this election.
Jim, one of the piece of advice I would offer is, with your network and your connectivity there, to get the county commissioners in each of the affected counties to get a written commitment from the governor's staff or someone that they will prioritize FEMA reimbursement. See, there's a lot of misconception, and I don't want to be the skunk at the garden party here, but it's not FEMA's job to be on the ground cleaning somebody's house that's got mud in it. That's not their role. Their role is to provide financial assistance and support to pay for the things needed to resolve and respond to people in need that are in trouble. So your county commissioners have a real important role to play, and they need to be organized, not separately, but as collectively, to really camp out on the governor's doorstep and get his butt engaged in getting FEMA support for the work they're doing. They're doing the work. Governor's not doing it. FEMA's not doing it. It's local organizations, city councils, county boards, natural resource districts, however your local governments are organized. But a lot of times everybody forgets to get the commitments that they need to get for that support. So they go spend a bunch of money. They spend a lot of money. They end up finding out they don't have any way to pay the bills.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
FEMA, that's where I fault FEMA. They should have been on the ground getting all that done right away.
But they weren't.
I don't know. Doesn't sound like it.
Are there any questions from the field? Anybody? Okay, I would like to just say a couple things in closing. I think that the spirit of North Carolina and the spirit of American citizens is what sets us apart from other places. I think it is real. I think it is alive. I think it is well. And Jim, God bless the work you're doing. Amanda and Brett, God bless the work you're doing. Stay safe, keep it up. We're in our own group setting up programs to try and bring some supplies in, not just for today, but for the next 4 to 6 months when it's going to be needed. And the best wishes, I'd like to give everyone the best wishes. Stay safe, keep the faith, and God bless America.